So, good evening and welcome back to part two of our wisdom in leadership, also known as leadership wisdom. We've got our guest and thought leader, Crispin Swart, and I'm your host, Moloto. And it's really good to have you with us this evening. Thank you for taking time out to be with us. We are looking forward to having you as part of this conversation. So please do put your comments in the chat box. Also, let us know if you have any questions, inputs, or contributions as we have the conversation. We'd love to get your voice in the room via our chat box. And also, please make sure that you go to our website, www.boundlesswisdom.com, to find out more about who we are and also to join our community. You can also follow us on our different social media platforms. Our handle is the same across different platforms. So we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, and we are also on LinkedIn and YouTube. So please follow, like, share our pages with different people that you think will benefit from being part of this community. And so today is the 25th of January, and we are here for part two of leadership wisdom. And we've got Crispin, who is our thought leader. And I just wanted Crispin to start off by, reflecting on the challenge that you gave us last week. And, and I think when you were talking about, giving your definition of what wisdom is, which is, wisdom is truth turned into action and outcomes, it got me thinking. And, and I thought, when has, wisdom been that truth that I have turned into action and then gotten outcomes, for myself? And I got thinking about my parenting and how in raising my children, I always have to test my truth, in terms of how am I relating to them, and, knowing what I know, which is the truth part of it, the knowledge part of it, taking that and applying it maybe in a situation where I have to lovingly discipline or where I have to correct them, in order for me to get the outcome that I'm looking for, which is, children who not only are obedient, but they're able to vocalize what their concerns and what their interests are. So that really got me thinking in that way. But if you could please just take us a little bit on a recap, and I'll bring up some
I'll do
slides for
that.
us.
Yes, please. Let's do that, Emma. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, and great to be with you. I must tell you, Emma, I also spent a lot of time reflecting after the last part one.
Yeah.
And I'll share some of that reflection with you as we go through it.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, so in terms of a recap, just to contextualize for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I don't think there's any debate about understanding the complexities and the turmoil in the world where we find ourselves and where leaders are expected to lead and influence and reach certain outcomes. And we used VUCA and Barney as the two kind of models to understand what that looks like and how that feels. VUCA, which is really familiar to many of us as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then Barney, which was coined in 2020 by Stephen Grabmaier, which is an acronym for a world that is experienced as being really brittle, a lot of anxiety in the world. Things are non-linear and a lot of things are incomprehensible. There's a lot of things we just really don't understand about our world. And how wisdom and leadership for me come together, and we just think about that. Oh yes, we also referred to the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report for 2022, if you recall that. And I noticed that some folk who were on the call last week had also posted that on to others as a reference to look to. It's really then the call to us as leaders to understand how do we navigate ourselves as individuals and as leaders and those who follow us. And I don't mean follow like in that sense, but those who look to us for leadership and guidance and understanding, as you were saying now, your children and others. And how we speak a lot about vulnerability and authenticity and purpose and values when we have leadership conversations, but not necessarily we don't necessarily engage enough, I think, on the topic of wisdom. And so we used Barney and we used VUCA as a segue into just importance, I believe, of wisdom for you and I as leaders, as we navigate through the complexities of what we find ourselves on with every day. Jeanette and I were really blessed today to spend 4 hours with a group of very senior leaders of an organization, and it was just really just humbling to listen to them express the complexities of the world they find themselves in, as they are driving targets and revenue and outcomes and performance and client satisfaction and all of these things. So that led us to really just exploring and unpacking further the concept of wisdom, Amo, and we got to some truths and some definitions. I'm not sure if you want me to go through those, but we can unpack those quickly just as a refresher. And then from that into a nice open discussion we had towards the end with the participants around, what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge, and how do we understand all of those and bring it together.
Mhm.
So yeah, sorry, did you want to ask a question?
I just wanted to touch
Hmm.
once again, Crispin, on that sixth element that you added, and I see you've put it in the
Yes.
center, that deep understanding of human condition, to say, in our
Mm.
application of wisdom, how can we be more aware of that human, condition?
Yeah. So yeah, I won't bore you with the process we went through and to kind of unpack and get to these truths and all the sources I consulted. Um, and the five really key truths of wisdom for us as leaders is that it is teachable and can be taught and we can learn it. That it can be gifted, and we used the example of Solomon as the king of Israel at that point just to illustrate some of this. That there's a spirituality to wisdom. It's not limited to a handful of selected old wise people sitting somewhere on top of a mountain. It's open to everybody and anyone, and that it's primarily in service of others. And then as the conversation unfolded, we also got to this point that wisdom requires of me to have a deep understanding of the human condition. Uh, What does it mean to be human in this space and in this world? And I referred to homeless people. Maybe you recall that conversation, and how often, we look down at people who we regard as not the same as us, but we forget that they're human. They are individuals with identities. They also help shape our world and influence our world. And so, deep understanding of the human condition, I believe, is a critical element of wisdom. And without going in too deep, what I also discovered, I mean, if I ask you the question back, I mean, if you look at those five and maybe the sixth one there, I think these are also, and you'll see in the heading, equals leadership truths. I think these are also really important leadership truths. And that's for me the sweet spot and connection between wisdom and leadership. Leadership is teachable, um, and I can be taught and developed and grown as a leader. Leadership can be gifted. We all deserve great leadership, and I can gift my leadership to somebody, and somebody can gift me with their leadership. Um, Somebody in the call this morning, if I may share that quote, said something so profound. They said, leadership for them is leading those who love them and following those whom they respect. I thought, wow, that's an incredible understanding of leadership, and there's a giftedness in that, and there's also spirituality in leadership. And there's a lot being done at the moment around leadership, or spirituality in the world of work as such. Leadership is open to anyone and everyone, and leadership is primarily in service of others. And if I think about it that way, then it too requires of me as a leader, irrespective of if I'm leading in an NGO space, startup business, corporate environment, in my family, a deep understanding not only of the human condition of those who I lead, but my own human condition, the truth of me, the truth of my own life, my own reality. And that's where wisdom comes into our definition that we had. And you actually illustrated it so beautifully in your introduction, referring to you as a parent, as a mom, and the deep understanding of your own humanness, and the truth in that, Ammo, and what's the truth in that. So I think there's a lot to be said for these wisdom truths, and the similarity, if you want, or the congruence between wisdom truths and leadership truths.
And then I know you looked at some of the definitions and you made mention of them last week when we were speaking. You said,
Yes.
as you were doing your own research and going through your own journey of finding out what wisdom is, you came across some definitions that, sort of resonated with you in one way or another.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you just had to Google wisdom, you're going to come up with a couple of million hits. It's just is unbelievable what's out there. And so I went through that painful process and extracted from that for me a couple of definitions. But a definition on its own doesn't really serve. And what I tried to do, Emma, as I shared last week, is really just convert that into something that really makes practical sense for me, as a parent, as a partner, as a sibling. And that got to the definition you'll see at the bottom of the screen. But just to run through those, the ability to discern or judge what is, can you see truth come through there? The ability to judge what is true. And I'm going to talk you through a little model just now. And one of the starting points of that model is, what's the truth in my situation as a leader or as an individual? And then you'll see the words lasting there. So in other words, it needs to lead to something that's the outcome part of the definition that we got to. The quality of being wise, the power of judging rightly and following the soundest. Again, can you see truth coming there? What's the truth and what's the right thing to do based on a whole lot of elements? And then I like the last one as well. It's using one's intelligence, creativity, common sense, and knowledge, which we can translate into truth, and to balance three domains. And that's the domain interpersonal, between people, intra, within myself, again the truth of what's here, and then extra, in other words, between groups of people and what's out there. So the influence of wisdom in my leadership role enables me to have influence in spaces that I normally would potentially not have. And so that helped me craft then the definition which we see there, which has those three parts to it. It's a deep understanding of truth. What is the truth? Not, and we spoke about, if you recall correctly, very often there are a lot of facts about a situation, but they can actually, and there can be different facts and different lenses. I'm busy doing a piece on conflict, and there's this lens model to conflict, the different lenses we look at something. And there could be many different lenses and there are many different facts about something. But I have a sense there can actually only just be one real truth. And it's discovering that truth that I think is important, so that we can turn that truth into action, really focused, structured action, and from that into concrete outcomes. And whether it is, in your case, a young child becoming a teenager and becoming independent and being able to make their own really important life decisions, that's an outcome. But it was born from you bringing truth into your relationship with that individual, and bringing action into how you raise them, discipline, teach them, mentor them, coach them, and everything else that parents do. This still is for me, and I may be waffling a bit, but this still is for me one of the most real and practical definitions that I could come up with in terms of understanding what wisdom is for us as individuals and as leaders. And very often, if you think about the realities that leaders face, most of the time what we think is true isn't necessarily. Share with you a little example just now about that. So I'm happy to, if there are folk on the call and if there's anybody that's on the Zoom, and I can't see the chat box, unfortunately, but just if there are any thoughts about this definition and the components that we've highlighted, if they could post that in the chat, and we could just get some feedback on to the extent to which this definition resonates with individuals, makes sense, and is aligned to maybe your own thinking of what wisdom is.
There's nothing in the chat for now. I just opened it and checked, but welcome to those that have just joined us. We are talking to our thought leader and guest, Crispin Swart, who's taking us through part 2 of leadership wisdom. And we were just doing a quick recap in terms of some of the points that we touched on last week, such as, the 5 truths around leadership wisdom, and also just around the definitions and I think the context that Crispin created last week by looking at the 2 theories, Barney and VUCA. So now I think we had just finished talking about the definitions, Crispin. I mean, this was just a recap of last week, but I know that there's also something you wanted to share with us, before we get started with, today's session.
So, if we think about it, and that's what I've been just trying to weave through as we just did this quick review of last week, is that wisdom and leadership are actually inseparable, that they do come together in a really powerful way. That to be impactful as a leader, I think wisdom is an important ingredient to my toolkit and what I should have there. And that as a leader, I based on my values and based on my mission, purpose, and all of that, I probably have an accountability to bring truth into situations. Those situations where I lead, those environments that I influence. I think we're seeing too much of the contrary in the world today, and too much of the contrary in our own country. And I think part of, if we think about wisdom leadership, it's how do we as leaders really just understand our responsibility and accountability to bring truth into what it is that we do. And so, we don't have enough time to unpack this in great depth, and we are going to host a series of master classes where we will be really just unpacking in a real practical way, what does truth mean for me as a leader, where I find myself when I need to take a decision about something, where I have to allocate resources, where I have to resolve conflict, where I have to decide between 2 people and who gets and who doesn't. And all of those conundrums that we face as leaders. And so one of the master classes will be spending specifically on just enabling us to craft our own definition as leaders of wisdom for me, what it means for me, how I understand it, and then how do I live it? How do I show up in a way that is perceived to be wise and insightful, and the other elements that we spoke about in our definition. In our conversation with the leaders this morning, we spoke about vulnerability, and that vulnerability isn't weakness. We spoke about authenticity. We spoke about all those incredible ingredients of what makes up a great leader. And I think if we can just, as I said earlier, without repeating itself, if I can just find for myself what it means as a leader to really embrace this concept of wisdom and truth, and then how I live that, and how I sometimes have to take some really, really tough decisions, how I sometimes have to say no, set those boundaries, walk away from something I would otherwise not have, and how wisdom can actually serve me in my leadership role. So let's not unpack it too much now, Amo. Let's just see how we can weave that into something I'm going to share with you just now in terms of a little model, and how we can also then use that framework in the master classes which we'll be making available. I think we were trying to do that in March, if I'm not mistaken. You're on mute, Amo. Sorry.
Apologies for that. We do have some master classes that are planned, and we will be communicating those dates, as well as there'll be information going out to make sure that everyone gets the information ahead of time. So I think now that we've looked at, for example, what you were talking about, Crispin, that sometimes there's certain qualities of leadership that are looked as weak, or not necessarily as, a positive thing in leadership, whether it's empathy or vulnerability, or, transparency or honesty, so I think it's just for us to, understand those. And if you can just maybe find a way of linking those for us and the people in this session to, just our thoughts or around wisdom leadership.
So let's go to the do you have the slide of can I tell the story of the Ashton Bridge and make
I
that
do have
nice and
that slide.
practical, just to bring that home in a real practical way. So I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the story of the Ashton Bridge. It's a fascinating story. And Amo, hold me true to bring this back to your question, please, as I just tell the story. If you approach Ashton from Robertson side, there's the Kochmanskloof River, which is the river you see on the left-hand side. You'll see the river going under the road, and the bridge you see on the left-hand side there was the old bridge that used to connect across the river. The bridge was built in the 1930s, so it's pretty old, and every year would flood, and there would be all sorts of things happening and delays. Then, obviously, with traffic going through on the Route 62. So the decision was made to build a new bridge across the river. And I remember it so vividly. And why I'm telling you the story is because I experienced this and I kind of observed this unfold. And so when I drove through Ashton some years back or some time back, they were actually in the middle of constructing this bridge. And as you can see in the left-hand picture, it's in the middle of nowhere. It just kind of, it's right next to the road, but it's just standing there. And they were building this bridge, and I looked at it and I thought to myself, nah, man, this can't be. I mean, how can I, man? This bridge must be on, must be on the road. Something's not right here. And so I was looking at this situation from my perspective, and immediately a lot of, and this is the point I'm trying to make about connecting it to wisdom. So many of my unconscious biases kicked in, and I immediately classified this as another failed government project that some contractor had won. They don't have a clue what they're doing. And at the end of the year, it's going to be another white elephant, like the sport fields we have in certain provinces that costed, well, how much? I think this particular one cost 130 million Rand at the end. And there it stands. And so you've got a bridge on the one side and you've got a road on the other, and it just kind of doesn't make sense. And so the first thing I learned is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, those on the call, is you look at something like this, it doesn't make sense to you, and you immediately make a decision. You immediately make a calling on it, like I did. Um, and that filter that came up for me, a typical another government project, that whole thing actually just blunted any curiosity to want to explore what's happening there further. It just I'm not interested in this anymore because it's a gemors to start with. Okay. And that's true for us as leaders. We often are faced with these situations and we look at them through a certain lens and we look at them in a particular way and we make up our minds really quickly. I'm right. That's the picture. And that's my understanding of the picture. Wisdom challenges us to bring the truth into it in a way and say, hang on, there may be another picture. There's another lens. There's another way of thinking about this, feeling about it, and looking at it. And then to my embarrassment, in August last year, you'll see the picture on the right. The bridge was completed. It's the first of its kind in South Africa. It's 110 meters long. And that arch you see there is 22 meters high. And as I said, and that bridge, as it is there, is estimated to weigh 8,000 tons. And so what they did in August last year, you'll see on the picture on the right, you'll still see the rails pointing down. They actually moved the bridge at a speed of 2 meters per hour. They moved the bridge into position, and suddenly the bridge connected the road and connected Ashton with Robertson. And I made a point to drive through there in January this year, and that bridge has unlocked the economy of the town. It's a clean town, the traffic flows, tourists are there, and it's just has had this incredible impact. And that's what I think what wisdom helps us do as leaders. It shifts perspective. It shifts things into place, firstly. Secondly, it connects things. You'll see the quote at the top there that as a leader, I represent the past. I represent everything that's brought me to this point. I represent the past of me. I represent the past of my team, my organization, where it is that I lead. I hold the present, and that's what the bridge does. It holds it holds the present, and it points to the future. And so as I thought through how do I make your question specifically, we have all these attributes of leadership, but we sometimes as leaders, as I said, look at things and we're not able to connect those dots, and something just doesn't make sense for us. And so we have choice, and many of us just reject that. And as I said, I get blunted and didn't want to explore it any further. And this has been one of the most incredible engineering achievements in a very long time. Just this bridge that was built there in the middle of nowhere and was actually moved, put into place, and is a testament of incredibly great engineering. Now, if I'd understood that when I first made my judgment call, I probably would have seen the opportunity, the benefit, the bigger scheme of things, the bigger picture. But I was so focused on my little judgmental way of thinking about what I'm seeing. So I'm not sure if that helps you, just your question around how do we bring wisdom practically into our lives as leaders? It helps us connect the dots. It helps us, it confronts us with our own bias. It confronts us very often with our own rejection of the truth, our own way of thinking about the truth, and it is a mirror. It holds it up there for you. And so this may sound really sentimental, but when I drove over that bridge for the first time in January, and I got to that middle point there where you can see, I blew my hooter, waved my hands, and said, "Hallelujah, I was wrong." And just look at
Admission.
this. And that's true. That's what it does. So I mean, there are other elements of thinking about this little illustration is that there is investment, there's time, there's effort that goes into this. There's risk as well, Amo. There's risk that this didn't work. There's risk that this whole project didn't work. And there's risk for me, and maybe there's an element of being scared to really explore the truth of where I am and what's up for me as a leader, and being faced with that reality and that truth. So wisdom is that vehicle for connecting the dots, bringing truth, but it's also, I believe, a unpeeling of the onion and getting to the real core of the truth of
Crispin, when you
me
touched on
and my leadership.
Yes. So when you touched on effort, that's the first thing I was thinking. When I looked at this massive structure, I thought, what an effort to actually go through all of that. I know that personally, when I drove during that time and they had roadworks, I had no idea. I saw there was a whole lot of metal. I had no idea. I couldn't have imagined that this is the structure that was being built, which still, takes us back to that, conversation about perspective. It's looking at things from a different viewpoint. And maybe had I even had an idea that this is what was being built, I would have been on the lookout. But because I wasn't aware, I wasn't even on the lookout. I couldn't see all the things that were happening in the background. So I was not able to appreciate the structure that was in front of me.
Yeah. And not referring to you, but my own arrogance. This is a messed up government project. What I don't expect more. And just that truth that actually I was actually so wrong. And I was so tainted in my view and my insights into it.
And
so wisdom
Crispin,
does require that. Sorry, I can't see the chat. I see some popping, but I can't see them. So can you help me with that, please?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to bring in, just to say, we've got 2 comments. And the first one, I think, is from Jeanette. And she says, lovely insights. Thank you. Sorry, I have to drop now as I have another commitment.
Thanks,
so please do share the recording. We will be sharing the recording. We'll be putting the links out there to our community and to everyone. The second comment, though, Crispin, is actually from Tess. And Tess was just saying that, I'll tell you now, as soon as I can get my chat box up. So wisdom requires self-awareness and reflection, also humility to admit you can be wrong. Not always common attributes in leaders. Very true. That admission of being wrong and, being vulnerable enough to admit that. Tess, Tess, that's really beautiful.
Beautiful.
That
May
is.
I add? May I add to that, Madam Chair?
By all means.
I think wisdom. Remember the quote we had last week of Viktor Frankl that said, it's a door that can only open from the inside.
Yes.
And I think, Tess, what's important is I'll never get to this point of insights and awareness and understanding if I don't allow people to speak into my life and speak truth into my life and my reality. And that takes incredible amounts of courage and self-awareness, ammo. Um, and it's still something I struggle with, to be honest, because I have my own view about me and my world and that. And as long as I keep that world and that view to myself, I'm never going to grow. I'm never going to open up. I'm never going to allow other versions of truth to come into my reality.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so this was a team effort. We spoke about risk. This was a
Yeah.
massive team effort. And I was sharing with the team this morning. I don't know if you followed the Rugby 7 in Spain on Sunday,
No.
where South Africa narrowly beat Argentina and won the final. And when they interviewed Neil Powell, was the England's coach, he was saying his first words were, "Thank you to the staff and the role players behind the scenes, the dietitians, the fitness experts, the couriers, the logistics people. They make it possible for the team to do what they do on the field." And so that humility test that you speak about is so important in this.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Sure.
yeah, so I
This was such a lovely recap. I'm sitting here and
mm,
I'm just thinking about, some of the things that we touched on just in the last 30 minutes. And I know we only have about 30 more minutes to go, but I'm really curious in terms of the tool that you wanted to share with us today and what it
let's
is
go
that you
there.
wanted us to
Let's
learn,
go there. Yes.
today about wisdom and leadership.
So before we dive into that, Amo, I mean, we are part of this organization called Boundless Wisdom. And we have, as part of our network, wisdom guides. And I think it's just also just important just to reflect on for a second this concept of wisdom guide. And then I'll share the model that I prepared. And if you think about a guide, a tour guide, as a teenager, I was a guide on an ostrich farm. And I used to take tourists around the ostrich farm and tell them everything there was about ostriches and rode ostriches and did all of that stuff. And a year or two ago, I was really privileged to have a guided tour through the Addo Elephant Park. And guides typically impart knowledge. They show you things you can't see for yourself. Um, my son's busy with a PhD in the Neisner Forest, and then we go into the forest, and he shows me things I'm completely blind to. So he's kind of a guide. It's almost like Braille. He shows me things that I couldn't see. Um, a guide protects. He has his gun, or she has a gun and protects you. A guide facilitates your learning and your growth, creates an experience for you, and a guide partners with you on a journey. And I think that's probably a nice way of thinking about, as wisdom guides within Boundless Wisdom. What is it that we do? How do we enable wisdom into conversations as we guide leaders, as we are guided by our guides as well? And so, one of the models we apply as wisdom guides is the Stellar model, which is on the next. I think it's on the next slide. Is it there? Yes. So many of us are in the coaching space are really familiar with the GROW model. The GROW, goal, reality, options, and way forward. We use it a lot in when we equip line managers and leaders to coach. Um, and it's a nice model to work with, and many of us are familiar with it. But I came across a model that I adopted from the Reinvention Academy, called Stellar, Stellar, and it's for me richer it's a kind of an enhancement of grow. And then as wisdom guides, I think if we had to think about your question, very good question, is how do I bring this practically into where I am now?
Mm.
Um, the Stellar model is a lovely framework, as I said, an enhancement potentially on grow that can be used and applied. I did Stellar last year, June, July, when I was in bed with COVID. I was part of the Reinvention program that was running, and I just gravitated to it and used Stellar for myself. I did a personal Stellar for me, um, and it's amazing reflecting on it back now, 7 months later, how much of what I had actually done there has actually realized and materialized and has come into fruition. So the model is really, really a practical model. It is primarily a strategy canvas model, but something that I think is just as applicable to bring into the conversation of wisdom and you and I as leaders. So it has a starting point, and that's where truth comes into it. And you'll see me reflect to it all the way through. Where am I now? What is my current reality? Where do I find myself? What's missing? What's not working? Um, who's in my reality at the moment? What in my reality is changing? What's it changing to? Where is it changing to? What's really, really going on? And what's holding me back? Whether it's in terms of finances, relationships, career, business opportunities and goals, my health, my spirit, all of that, it's what's the starting point and where do I find myself? And so we spend a lot of time really unpacking what that starting point is. It's really is a powerful point. Now that talks almost to if you can keep grow in the back of your mind, it talks to the R part of grow, the reality. What's the reality? So it doesn't start with a goal. It starts with where do I find myself now? And we found too often in the past that we craft this beautiful goal, but it's not achievable because we don't really know where we're coming from. Okay. I was working with two business owners that had started their own company 2 years ago the other day, and we were doing this model. And the one person, as part of unpacking their starting point, was saying, "But we're a family business." I said, "Oh, okay, cool. And the other person said, "No, no, 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 we're not. We may be related, but we're not a family business." So the starting point helps you understand truth. What are we? Where am I? And where do I find myself at this point in time? And then the next part is what is the outcome? Where am I? If we can just move the slides, what's the end state? What am I working towards? Again, what I mentioned, I identify, whether it is finance, health, spirituality, relationships, career, etc. What is that end state? And there's a very particular way that's kind of different to grow of how we craft that end state. And we'll illustrate that in a masterclass at some point. But how do we define what it is that I really want to work towards? Now, and what we do find really interesting is as I craft that end state, I start looking back and I see, hang on, but my starting point is not necessarily all that accurate. And maybe I'm missing some truth in my starting point. Maybe I need to revisit my starting point and unpack something there. And so they kind of work together. So that's the ST of stellar. The E is the end state. And then we go into a nice process, a really practical process. If you can just move the slides, you can move it on another one. If I think back, what are some of the lessons learned? And there's truth in that. What lessons have I learned about my journey, my reality, my situations, the mistakes I've made and what I've learned from that? What's the truth in those lessons? I procrastinate, or I set a goal but don't push through with it, or I postpone things, or I lose confidence along the way, or what's the truth? Or I end up beating this bush to a smithereens, but I know it's not going to go anywhere. So what are the truth in the lessons that I've learned? And then the limits are what are the boundaries that I will not go over that. Those they protect me and they hold me aligned. And then we go into a series of so can you see how we first unpack truth of my reality, truth of my end state, truth of my lessons learned, and the boundaries that are important for me. And then from there, we go into a series of, so what are the actions that will move us? And then we build in very specific review points along the way, which is something that Grow doesn't necessarily have, of checking in where I am with my actions. And then the truth of my progress. And we may get to a review point and decide to continue on a course of action. We may get to a review point and the truth is blaringly there that we're actually busy doing the wrong thing. We should change course. So it's a really interesting, lovely model, Amo, that wisdom guides would help, have conversations with folk through and guide them to bring real truth into their reality, come up with real concrete actions, and be truthful about those actions and which of those actions after a period of time do we continue doing, which do we abort, we don't do them anymore, or which do we course correct on. And so it's called Stellar, Stellar. Sorry, I forgot to put the name in there. I can see it's missing on the slide. But it's one of those tools, and there are many other tools that wisdom guides would use to help unpack, your priorities, where you are, where you would want to start focusing on. I just flippantly, it's, health or finance or this or that, but there's a process of getting to that decision of what that is. And so nice, real practical model that I'm busy having a conversation with somebody at the moment about how one can use this to address substance abuse in agriculture. Currently, as I said, with a small startup company, and really a powerful model for personal growth and revelation of truth as I embark on this.
And I think, Crispin, the one thing for me when I look at this model that I find stands out, that and it's not in any way to discredit the Grow model, because I think the Grow model is also a really great tool. I like the part about lessons. As I think and reflect, as I sit there, I can look at what is it that I have learned in this current reality, so that I don't repeat the same mistakes, so that I don't go through and fall in the same pit, so to speak. So that part about really owning the lessons and seeing if there are any patterns, if there are any themes, or if there's anything that I need to be aware of, that's the part that I absolutely like about the Stellar model.
And linking back to the Ashton Bridge illustration, this is really powerful when you can actually do this with somebody that can challenge your thinking, challenge your perception, challenge your truth. Because sometimes we don't do it well enough for ourselves. When I did Stellar, and I'm just sharing this, I know we're in a public space, but one of the lessons learned about me and projects I've tried and initiatives I've tried in the past is at some point I lose confidence in myself. And that's a truth I had to face. It's a truth I had to face and realize if I want to make this work, I have to work on that aspect of me, my character, and liberating truth, which I would never have got to if I hadn't been challenged to explore that. So yeah, lessons learned, limits, it just brings it all together in a really nice way, doesn't it? It's actually,
yeah, it really does. And I think just having that accountability partner, and I know this is something that you touched on a little bit earlier, when someone challenges you, they're also in a way holding you accountable, because you can't be faced with the truth and not act on that truth. So now that the truth has been revealed to you, what steps, what actions, what is it that you're going to do? And, and then you have to actually follow through. And so I like that part of doing it with someone, whether it's a wisdom guide, whether it's, someone that you trust, and you say, look, I'm sitting with my wisdom guide and we had a session and this is what they gave me. I just want to test some of this with you. You know me well, or we work closely together, or you're someone, that I look up to in terms of, what are your inputs in this? So I like the challenging, part where you get a different perspective, you get a different viewpoint.
Yeah. And I must say, it has really enhanced just my thinking about coaching and how one can structure a coaching conversation as well. Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, obviously. When we when we have the master classes, which are coming up, late February, early March, we'll communicate those dates so that everyone knows. This is one of the tools that you will get to really utilize, you will get to engage with, you will just immerse yourself in it and go, leave the masterclass, go and do whatever self-paced learning that you need to do. Come back having reflected and having done, that introspection to say, this is actually what I've learned, or this is what's been revealed to me in the past week as I was reflecting, as I was thinking, as I was gathering information and asking, trusted sources and people that I work with for feedback in terms of, how I can do things differently, do things better, do things more efficiently, or whatever, your goal is, your end outcome is. So it's a really good tool to use. And Crispin, while we've got you here, I don't want to miss this opportunity. I'd like for you to just give us a snippet of what we can expect in the masterclass. The one thing I know is that it's a 4-part series. So if you can just let us know what to expect
Yes.
in the first class,
Okay.
all the way through to the 4th class.
So it is a 4-part series, as you can see on the screen. The purpose of the first one is really just to ground this concept of wisdom again, just refresh ourselves on it, knowing that folk who may be attending the masterclass haven't necessarily attended the webinars. So it's really just to bring that home and to craft a space for you to come up with your own definition of wisdom for you as a leader. It's not to say the one that we have is the only one and we can all bring our own version of that. And then the first part is really to focus on, where do I want to start? What is it that I really would want to focus on before we even get into Stellar? And we have models and tools that we would be applying during that time. Each of these are 90 minutes in duration. And so the outcome of the first masterclass is, okay, cool. I have a sense of what wisdom means for me. I have a sense of why it's important for me. I have a sense of why I want to embrace it. I have a sense of why I want to include it in my leadership vocabulary. And I want to embark on a journey of bringing truth into a specific aspect of my life and my leadership. And we'll help you define what that is there. And then we'll take Stellar in Masterclass 2 and 3. We'll take Stellar and unpack that really practically all the way through. Deep dive into the model. I mean, I probably haven't shared 2% of what the whole model is, just really a deep dive into it. It's thinking, the templates and everything that underpins it. And then spend some time on what's your starting point and your end state, and getting that clear. And that what's wisselwerking, that interaction between those two, so you're really clear in your mind what that starting point is. Are we a family business or are we not? What am I? And where is it that I would want to be 6 months or a year or whatever from now? And as you correctly said, in between these master classes there'll be some self-paced work and reflection. And then the third masterclass is really unpacking lessons learned, my boundaries, limits, identifying at least 2 actions that I'd like to really embed and really drive. And then to define what those review points are, how they will happen, who will be part of those review points. Will it be my coach, my spouse, my accountability buddy, or whatever that may be? And then we enter into a rich conversation around this concept of the readiness for change. So now I have Stellar, but it requires change. And so then we're going to go into a really powerful conversation about personal change, my readiness for change, my anticipation of change, my ability to anticipate change, understand change, what change is required for me to action what it is I'm wanting to action, and how do I actually implement that. So the last masterclass is really around crafting for me a change roadmap for what I've come up with as part of my actions in Stellar. And specifically, what are some of those enablers to change? And potentially what are some of those barriers that will hold me back? And what we will do when we unpack those enablers and barriers, we'll link it right back to the starting position in Stellar and say, is there a truth around that barrier that may be something you want to think about as part of your starting position? So it's going to be a really interactive four-part session. or program. And the idea is that you will come out of that having experienced this journey. And then you could, if you want to, from there, make a call on whether you want to connect with the wisdom guide and continue the process with other actions and other elements of what it is you would like to explore further.
Well, Crispin, thank you for taking us through what we can expect on the masterclass. I can tell you this for sure. I will be there because I'm very curious. I will definitely be there. I'm very curious to hear how I can take that stellar model and prepare myself for the change that is pending that I need to actually own up. So I'll definitely be there for that masterclass. And I think
Thank you.
You're most welcome. So I think that actually brings us to the end of this particular live event tonight. And if there are any comments or there are any other questions or contributions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. Or maybe you have something that you'd like to ask Crispin, something that you'd like to contribute. I see we've just had something that's pop up in the chat box. I think it's Tess saying, thank you so much. Need to sign off now. Thank you for joining us, Tess. We appreciate you joining us. So I think if there are any other comments or questions, please keep the conversation going on our different platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, as well as on LinkedIn. You'll find that in this past week, we were talking about the different debates and we were posting different questions every day just around leadership wisdom. So please do go back to our in LinkedIn page to actually converse with us and engage with us around those different debates that we gave you. And so, having said that, I just want to say once again, thank you so much, Crispin, for your time, for sharing your knowledge with us, your experience, your insights. We absolutely appreciate you. We appreciate your time that you set aside. I'm looking forward to the masterclass, and I imagine that as people go through this recording, they'll also be curious enough to want to find out how they can use the tools that the wisdom guides can share with them to help them as they grow and as they evolve as leaders. I see we've got one more comment, and it's just Renee saying, thank you, Amo and Crispin, for your insights. And thank you, Renee, for joining us and for being here this evening.
Thank you.
And maybe just in closing, before we leave, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that on this Thursday, as in the day after tomorrow, we are welcoming back our thought leader, Colin Kuhn, and he will be taking us through a refresher and a recap on enabling conversations. So please do join us on Thursday at 6 p.m. as Colin Kuhn will be taking us back to enabling conversations. This will be a two-part series starting this Thursday, the 27th of January, and the second and last part of this series will be on the 1st of February, which is next Tuesday. So please join us for those sessions. Tell a friend, invite a friend, like, share, and keep the conversation going. Remember to follow us on our different social media platforms and do join our community. Thank you for joining us and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.